My father was not a sentimental man. He didn't say, I love you easily, didn't hug unless you initiated it, didn't mark occasions with cards or speeches or any of the emotional currency that some families trade in freely. What he gave instead was presence. He showed up. He came to every baseball game I ever played, and I played from age 7 through high school, which is a lot of cold bleachers for a man who didn't particularly like sports. He drove 4 hours round trip when I had my wisdom teeth out in college and couldn't afford to be miserable alone. He called every Sunday at 7 in the evening for 15 years without fail because he had decided that was what a good father did. And once Raymond Calloway decided something, that was the end of the discussion. So when he died, suddenly, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in his workshop where he liked to build furniture nobody needed, the grief I felt was the kind that doesn't announce itself cleanly. It moved in like weather. It changed the quality of light in every ordinary moment. I'm telling you all of this so you understand what it meant when I found out what he had done with his will. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old, originally from a small city in central Ohio that I'll keep vague, and I am the middle of 3 children. My older brother is Derek, 41, an electrician with a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage he describes as his permanent personality. My younger sister is Cheryl, 34, who works in school administration and is the most openly emotional of the 3 of us, which means she expressed the grief our father never quite taught the rest of us how to articulate. Our mother and father divorced when I was 16. It was not a dramatic divorce, no affairs discovered, no explosive fights. It was more like a slow tide going out. 2 people who'd built a life together realizing somewhere in their 40s that the life they'd built was the only thing they still had in common. They split with a civility that I actually respected more as an adult than I did as a teenager who wanted someone to be the villain and was denied that comfort. Dad stayed single for a long time. He dated occasionally, a woman named Patricia for about 2 years in his early 50s that we all liked, but nothing became permanent. He seemed content. He had his house, his workshop, his Sunday calls, his routine. He was 71 years old, and I genuinely believed with the specific arrogance of someone who has never really examined their assumptions that the outline of his life was the outline it would always have. Then he called me one Sunday and told me he had met someone. Her name was Renata. She was 63 years old, a retired dental hygienist, a widow with 2 adult children of her own who lived in other states. He had met her at a woodworking class at the local community center. My father, who had been building furniture for 30 years, had apparently signed up for a beginner's woodworking class because, as he told me with a dry humor I recognized as his closest approximation of self-awareness, the instructor was teaching a dovetail joinery technique he had never properly mastered. I liked this story. It was so perfectly him, precise, slightly absurd, entirely sincere. He brought Renata to Thanksgiving that year. I'll be honest with you, we were awkward about it. Derek was polite in the particular way that means reserved. Cheryl was warmer, but I could see her watching Renata with an assessment in her eyes she was trying to keep neutral. I made conversation. I found Renata to be a perfectly pleasant woman, soft-spoken, genuinely interested in what we had to say, slightly nervous in a way that made me sympathetic because God knows I'd have been nervous in her position. Dad watched us interact with her and said almost nothing, which was normal. He processed, he observed. He would talk to each of us individually later, and he did. He called me the following Sunday and asked what I thought of her, and I told him honestly that I thought she seemed kind and that I was glad he wasn't alone. He said, "Good, because I'm going to marry her." That was February. They were married in June at the county courthouse with just the 3 of us kids and Renata's 2 daughters present. It was quiet and brief, and my father looked more relaxed than I had seen him in years, and I stood there watching him and told myself that whatever complicated feelings I had about the speed of it were mine to manage, not his problem to solve. 8 months after that wedding, he was dead. I want to give you the weeks immediately following his death as accurately as I can because the chaos of grief does things to your memory that I'm still untangling. There was the initial shock, the call from Renata, her voice so controlled that I remember thinking distantly that she was holding herself together through sheer will. There was the drive to his house, walking into rooms that still smelled like him. There was the funeral, which was small because he would have hated a big one. And then, about 3 weeks after he was buried, Derek called me and said we needed to talk about the estate. Dad had been comfortable financially. He had owned his home outright, a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that had appreciated considerably over the 30 years he had lived there. He had retirement accounts from decades of working as a mechanical engineer. He had investments, modest but steady, that he had tended with the same patient discipline he applied to everything. The total estate, once Derek had made some preliminary inquiries, was estimated at approximately $2.3 million. Derek had contacted the attorney who had handled Dad's affairs for years, and the attorney told him something that Derek then relayed to me in a phone call where I could hear the tension in his voice like a plucked wire. Dad had updated his will 7 months ago, 1 month after the wedding, and in the updated will, he had left the entirety of his estate to Renata. Not divided, not split with provisions for the children. Everything. There was a single line that mentioned the 3 of us kids, stating that he trusted we were capable of supporting ourselves and that he wished to ensure Renata's security. That was it. That was the sum of 30-plus years of being Raymond Calloway's children had amounted to in legal language. Derek wanted to contest the will immediately. He had already spoken to an estate attorney, not Dad's attorney, a different one, who told him that contesting a will updated so shortly after a second marriage with an elderly testator was not without legal basis. Undue influence was the phrase, the implication being that Renata somehow influenced or manipulated our father into rewriting his estate in her favor within weeks of their marriage. Cheryl was devastated in the way she processed everything, openly, loudly, with grief and anger wound together so tightly she couldn't always separate them. She kept calling me crying, then calling me angry again. She kept saying she didn't understand, that Dad had always said the house would stay in the family, that she couldn't believe he would do this. And me, I was the middle child, which means I am constitutionally incapable of processing anything in a straight line. I felt the loss. I felt the financial sting. I won't pretend otherwise because $2.3 million split 3 ways is significant money, and I'm not going to perform a virtue I don't entirely possess. But I also felt something else beneath the anger, something that kept nagging at me and that I couldn't name yet. I knew my father, not perfectly, nobody knows anybody perfectly, but I knew how he made decisions. He was deliberate. He was not impulsive. He was not a man who could be sweet-talked into anything by anyone, and the idea of 63-year-old Renata, nervous at our Thanksgiving table, orchestrating some manipulation of a 71-year-old mechanical engineer who had been independently managing his life and finances for decades, it didn't sit right with me. It didn't mean Derek was wrong, it just meant I wasn't ready to be certain yet. I drove to the house, Dad's house, Renata's house now, technically, about a month after the funeral. I called ahead. Renata answered and said, of course, come whenever you wanted, that the house was still ours to move through whenever we needed. When I arrived, she made coffee and then gave me space, which I appreciated more than I told her. I spent a few hours going through his workshop, which nobody had touched. His tools were hung with geometric precision he applied to everything. A half-finished side table sat on the workbench, a dovetail joint partially cut, the specific technique I remembered he was learning when he met Renata. I stood in the doorway of that workshop for a long time and let myself feel the loss of him without the noise of the estate dispute surrounding it. Then I went to the attic. There was no specific reason I went to the attic. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I think I wanted to be in the places he had been, to move through the geography of his life and feel connected to it before the legal proceedings that Derek was pushing for potentially made that complicated. The attic was organized the way everything he owned was organized, labeled boxes, clear pathways, nothing without a purpose. In the back corner, behind boxes of our childhood things, school projects, old sports equipment, the kind of artifacts parents keep without knowing exactly why. There was a metal lockbox. I recognized it. It had sat in various places in his house for my entire life, and I had never known what was in it because it was the one thing he'd never explained and I'd never asked about. because asking Raymond Calloway about something he hadn't offered to discuss was generally understood to be a dead end. The lockbox wasn't locked. I don't know if it ever had been or if the lock had simply worn out over decades. Inside, there were documents, insurance papers, the deed to the house, the kind of foundational paperwork a careful man keeps in a fireproof box, and underneath all of it, a sealed envelope with my name on it. Not Derek's name, not Cheryl's name, my name, Marcus, in my father's handwriting, which I would know anywhere. Small, precise, slightly backward slanting letters that looked like an engineer's hand, which it was. I sat down on the attic floor with the envelope in my hands and stayed there for probably 5 minutes before I opened it. It was 4 pages, handwritten, dated approximately 2 months before he died. I'm going to share the substance of it, not word for word, both because some of it is too private and because some of it I still can't get through without losing my composure in a way that makes reading aloud impossible. But the substance is this. He knew he was sick. Not the heart attack specifically. That was sudden, as far as anyone could tell. But he had been having cardiac symptoms for several months and had been told by his doctor that his heart was not in good condition and that the trajectory was not encouraging. He had declined to tell us. This was, he wrote, a decision he had made deliberately and without apology, because he had watched his own mother's final 2 years consumed by her family's grief and preparatory mourning, and he had no interest in spending whatever time he had left being treated like he was already gone. He had married Renata knowing he was sick. He had updated his will knowing he was sick, and he explained, in the careful, precise language of a man who had thought everything through and wanted to make sure he was understood, exactly why he had done what he did. Renata, he wrote, had 2 daughters who lived far away, and a financial situation that was comfortable but not secure. She was 63 years old. If he died, when he died, he corrected himself in parentheses, she would be a widow for potentially the 2nd time in a decade, in a house that was not hers, in a city where her primary community had become, in a short time, him and the life they were building. He loved her. He wrote that plainly, without ornament, in a way that made it land harder than any elaborate declaration. He loved her, and he was going to leave her, and he wanted to make sure that the leaving didn't destroy her. As for us, Derek, Cheryl, and me, he wrote about each of us. He wrote about Derek's stability, his work ethic, the financial security he had built through his own hands. He wrote about Cheryl and her chosen career, the way she had always prioritized meaning over money and his pride in that. And he wrote about me, about the business I had built, the decisions I had made, the way he had watched me navigate difficulty with a steadiness he recognized, he said, as his own. He was not leaving us nothing because he didn't love us. He was leaving us nothing because he trusted us. That was the exact word he used, trusted. And then he said something that I have turned over in my mind almost every day since. He said he knew there was a possibility we would contest the will. He said he knew Derek especially would be angry, and that this was fair, because Derek experienced the world through a lens of fairness that was one of his best qualities even when it made things harder. He said he hoped we wouldn't contest it, because Renata deserved what he had decided to give her, and because a legal fight would cost money and years and peace that he'd rather we spend living. But he said he understood if we did. And then, at the very end, he wrote, "Marcus, I'm leaving this letter for you specifically because you're the one most likely to find it and also the one most likely to understand it. You've always known how to hold complexity without needing it to resolve into something simpler. I'm sorry for the weight of that. It's never entirely fair to ask the person in the middle to be the one who sees the whole picture, but I think you can carry this. I've always thought you could carry more than you've been asked to." I read that letter on the attic floor, and then I sat there for a long time in the particular silence of a house where someone used to be.
The question of what to do with it was not simple. Derek was already in contact with the estate attorney. Cheryl was processing her grief through her anger at the situation. My mother, who I called occasionally during this period, was sympathetic but appropriately removed from a dispute about her ex-husband's estate. And I was sitting in an attic holding 4 pages that explained everything and resolved nothing. Because here's what I understood clearly. The letter changed the moral picture entirely. My father had not been manipulated. He had not been unduly influenced by a woman who maneuvered herself into his estate. He had made a conscious, considered, loving decision, loving towards Renata and, yes, in his particular way, loving towards us, in that he had judged us capable of withstanding it. But the legal picture was different. The letter was not part of the will. It was not witnessed or notarized. It was a personal communication that explained intent but did not alter legal standing. Derek's attorney's case for undue influence did not disappear because I had found a handwritten letter in a lockbox. If Derek decided to pursue the contest, he could pursue it, and the letter might or might not be relevant depending on how the case developed. I called my brother that night. I told him I had found something in the attic and I needed him to come, and I needed Cheryl there too. 2 days later, we were all at the house sitting at the kitchen table where we had eaten 1,000 meals as children, and I read them the letter out loud. Derek's face went through about 6 different expressions during those 4 pages, and I watched all of them and said nothing. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that Renata, who had been quietly in the other room, appeared in the doorway to check if we were all right, saw our faces, and disappeared again without a word. Derek said, "He should have told us he was sick." I said, "I know." Cheryl said, "He should have talked to us before changing the will." I said, "I know." Derek said, "It doesn't change the legal situation." I said, "I know that too." And then Derek sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and was quiet for a long time. He's a practical man, my brother. He works with his hands and he thinks in concrete terms, and he feels things deeply but doesn't always know where to put it. I watched him work through something and I waited. He said, "What do you want to do, Marcus?" And I understood what he was really asking. He was asking me to be what Dad had said I was, the one who could hold complexity, the one who could see the whole picture. He was asking me, and I hated it a little and understood it completely. I told him I didn't want to contest the will. I told him I thought doing so would cost us years and money and the version of ourselves our father believed we were capable of being. I told him that Renata was 63 years old and did nothing wrong, that she loved our father and he loved her, and not felt true to me whether or not any of us were comfortable with the outcome of it. I told him that Dad made a choice, and that the choice said something real about how he saw us, not as people he didn't love, but as people he trusted. And then he said something that I have turned over in my mind almost every day since. He said we could still be angry, that anger and acceptance were not mutually exclusive. I was angry too. I was furious, actually, at the secrecy about his health, at the lack of conversation, at the fact that he put me in this position in a letter while presumably knowing that the position would be hard. But anger and legal action were also not the same thing, and I'm not sure the legal action would give us anything that actually addressed the anger. Courts don't settle grief. Cheryl cried. She had been crying in various increments since I started reading the letter, and she cried more now, but it was different crying, the kind that releases pressure rather than builds it. Derek didn't say anything for a long time, and then he said he needed a few weeks.
We gave him a few weeks. During those weeks, I had several conversations with him individually, and a few with Cheryl, and one with my mother, who said something that I have returned to often. She said she recognized that decision in Raymond, the one in the letter, and that she had always known he trusted by leaving people to their own capability, that it was his deepest love language and his most significant blind spot simultaneously, to look at someone and say, "You can handle it," without always asking if that was what they wanted to hear. At the end of those weeks, Derek called me and said he had decided not to contest the will. He said it without explanation, and I didn't ask for one, because I understood it the way you understand a thing when you've been talking around it long enough that the center becomes clear. Renata still lives in the house. We see her at holidays. Awkward, tender occasions that are slowly becoming less awkward and slightly more tender. She has never mentioned the estate dispute or the weeks in which we were deciding whether to take her to court, and I don't know if Dad told her what might happen, or if she simply weathered it in silence the way she seems to weather most things. She is careful with us. We are careful with her. It is not a warm relationship yet. I don't know if it will become one. What I know is this. My father was a man who showed love through presence and trust and the quiet decision to believe in the people he loved. And in the end, he showed it to Renata by ensuring she would be safe. And he showed it to us by believing we could accept that and survive it and remain who he'd raised us to be. Was he right? Mostly, I think. We're here. We're intact, the three of us, which, given what we went through, is not nothing. We're angrier than we were and more complicated than we were, but we're intact. The half-finished side table is still in his workshop. Nobody has touched it. I don't know what will happen to it eventually, but sometimes when I visit, I go in there and stand at the bench and look at that half-cut dovetail joint, the specific technique he learned in the class where he met the woman he chose to protect. And I think about the fact that he never finished it. And I think about how much of what he built is still standing anyway. That has to be enough. I've decided it's enough. Most days, it actually is.